David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So, like many of you, I watched the State of the Union address last night. This was Donald Trump's first sort of official State of the Union. The one last year, a week or two into his presidency, it looked like a State of the Union and it sounded like what a Donald Trump State of the Union would be like, but traditionally not called a State of the Union address when it's a new president who's just taken over. So, putatively, ostensibly, the first real Donald Trump State of the Union. And I watched in detail, and I sat there wrapped up in blankets to protect myself from the horrible reality of what I was seeing on TV. And I plan to do like a full analysis for you and do a point-by-point breakdown, talk about each element of the speech. And as I was watching it and thinking about it afterwards in particular, I realized that you can't really do what I guess we would call a normal analysis of the speech. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play a bunch of different clips and react to them one by one. I'm just going to talk about it and give you my sense of sort of what this speech represents in the context of the first year of the Trump presidency and the outlook going forward when it comes to the midterms and the possibility of Donald Trump's maybe eventual reelection. And you sort of have the overall speech to start with. You have, by the way, what was supposed to be an hour speech, but because of the applause, as well as just the insanely slow nature of Donald Trump's delivery, it ended up being like an hour and a half. Didn't you say, Pat? An hour 20 something?
Something like that. The applause has to be banned, I think.
The applause is very problematic. Now, didn't you watch it the entire thing at 2x speed? After the fact, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I was smart enough to watch it later on,
Yeah.
once it was on YouTube, and then you can change the speed. So like 1.5x, 2x. I watched it at twice the speed.
I should have done that, and then I could have watched it in half the time. So you've got this entire speech, right? An hour and 20-something minute speech, or however long it was. To really analyze the meat of the speech, you have to first take away all of the planned emotional moments where the president tells an inspiring or emotional story about a guest in the crowd, a soldier, a police officer, the adopter of a baby born addicted to opioids. All presidents do that. It's a show. It's not really what you analyze, but it influences people's perception of how the speech went. And Trump happened to do a lot of that. Trump even opened with some of those, I want to say hi to this and that person. Normally, the presidents stick that stuff in, certainly in the second half of the speech, usually around like the 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through mark. Trump almost opened with some of that stuff.
Yeah, there was that North Korea defector, the kid who was giving out flags to put on the grave sites of veterans, all that stuff.
A lot of these individuals. And that's not really anything to analyze, right? So we scratch those parts from our analysis. Then we can do an analysis of the accomplishments that the president claims for themselves from the prior year and compare it to the sort of reality of what took place. Donald Trump did a lot of bragging. A lot of the bragging was about things that weren't real. The other half was about things that I wouldn't be bragging about. One example of this is Trump bragged about his attempt to resuscitate what he called beautiful, clean coal, which isn't a thing. It's a polluting fossil fuel. That's just one example of what Trump bragged about. That's not really something to brag about. So then once you say, okay, fine, so they've done the emotional stuff and they've gotten us to feel connected to this person in the crowd or that person in the crowd, and they sort of seem like a normal person. And by the way, I don't want to go completely off the rails, but did anybody else notice most presidents, when they point to someone in the upper deck, a special guest, and there's an emotional tribute, the president looks at them while he is clapping. But Trump is so narcissistic, and it's all about self-aggrandizement, that when he would do those emotional moments, he would clap, but be looking around and over his shoulder to see how other people were reacting to his emotional tribute. Like every aspect of this thing was totally depraved. But okay, we get past the patting on the back, we get past the emotional moments, and we get to policy analysis. Well, that's a problem because Donald Trump made a lot of statements that sort of sounded like they were about policy, but other than saying he's going to keep Guantanamo Bay Detention Center open in Cuba and outlining sort of a plan on immigration, although it wasn't really a plan, but it kind of was an idea of what could maybe be a plan. There was very little in this nearly 90-minute speech in terms of policy to even analyze. There were really no proposals or ideas on the environment, which Trump doesn't really think is a problem. Taxes, Trump believes that taxes is done. He believes that taxes has been solved. Nothing on healthcare other than, again, cheerleading the repeal of the individual mandate, which in and of itself is not really a solution to anything. He cheered what he's doing partially inaccurately, but there were no real policy proposals to speak of. He dangled this thing, and you mentioned this to me, Pat, this way of safeguarding the 1.8 million undocumented people that came to the U.S. as kids. It relates to DACA. But in outlining that plan, he made it very clear that many of the current provisions around immigration need to be scrapped, and that's going to be terrible for a lot of people.
Usually the president offers some new policy proposals. He just rehashed the things he's been saying.
Yeah.
To offer some silver linings, though, which I'm famous for,
yes.
He had that $1.5 trillion infrastructure proposal. Now,
Right.
a lot of it is corporate handouts.
Of course,
and the burden's
crony
gonna go to
capitalism,
state and local governments.
Yep.
Paid family leave was another one. And then an emphasis on trying to lower the cost of prescription drugs.
Yes.
Now, I don't know how he's going to do that, but that's the plan, I guess.
Trump campaigned on lowering the cost of prescription drugs. And then shortly after being elected, he had a meeting with pharma and insurance lobbyists. And he came out, and all of a sudden it wasn't important anymore to lower the price of prescription drugs. So now he's put that back, I guess, on the list again with no plan as to how he would really do it. So it's not really a policy proposal.
I think it's Jared Kushner's responsibility. Once he solves peace in the Middle East, he'll move on to that.
He'll move on to that next. The one specific policy or actionable idea that Trump mentioned that actually I do want to discuss is really scary in a sort of authoritarian way. Donald Trump said, quote, "Tonight, I call on the Congress to empower every cabinet secretary with the authority to reward good workers and to remove federal employees who undermine the public trust or fail the American people." This slipped by a lot of people yesterday, and the implications of it are incredibly dangerous. What Donald Trump is effectively calling for here is completely anti-democratic. What Trump suggested is that any cabinet member of Trump's could decide unilaterally, there are people under my supervision that are they've destroyed public trust in them. They've undermined the public trust, and I am going to fire these people. That could be someone who, as part of their role at the FBI, is conducting an investigation. Imagine that investigation was hypothetically, into possible Trump collusion with Russia during the election or cover up of that collusion. And a cabinet member could unilaterally decide, Jeff Sessions, for example, who runs the Justice Department as Attorney General, could say, they've undermined the trust of the public, and I am going to fire that person on the spot. And what this goes to is eliminating the supposed independence of agencies like the FBI and the Department of Justice and others. It's a very dangerous disaster, and it's mostly flown under the radar because of the language Trump used.
Right. I mean, I got to be honest, this flew under my radar too.
Yep.
And maybe it was because I was watching it at 2 times the speed, but I think it was more because it was just so vaguely worded, and it just sounds like more oversight and rule of law rhetoric to me.
It sounds like empowering people to reward good employees and to get rid of bad employees. But it's a framework that could justify the firing of Robert Mueller, for example. It can create a pretext for all sorts of authoritarian manipulation by Trump. It is very, very dangerous, and that to me was a really scary moment of the speech. And then lastly, if we want to think about a State of the Union address as an attempt to do bipartisan diplomacy, as a way to extend an olive branch to the other side, the right has cheered Trump for extending an olive branch in this speech. They talked about how many times Trump used the word "we" and talked about Democrats and Republicans working together. But just because you talk about working together doesn't mean your speech is actually going to have the effect of being a uniting force. And in fact, the rhetoric of Trump's speech was very divisive, not uniting. It was, in short, let's work together and compromise for the good of the American people and the betterment of America. As long as you agree to what Trump wants to do, effectively full stop.
Yeah, when he was talking about immigration policy, he cut to the parents of 2 teenage girls who were killed by MS-13 members.
That's right.
Now, you can mention some of the more positive tales of immigration, some success story. I mean, Trump's own wife and mother were immigrants, but no, he cut to that instead.
He cut to that, and by the way, I haven't fact-checked this, but he talked about thousands and thousands of MS-13 members in the United States who have been deported. I just remembered, I didn't fact-check that. We've deported thousands and thousands of members of that one particular gang.
Plus, MS-13 started in LA, too.
Yeah, right.
You know?
That's a complete other thing, which is a lot of the people in MS-13 from the beginning, yes, they were from immigrant families at some point, and maybe personally, but not necessarily here illegally. Those were weird numbers. I didn't look them up, but I'd be curious what the truth is. But yeah, Trump talked about bringing the nation together despite being the reason that it's being torn apart. And he talked about respect and the rule of law when he was trying to interfere in the separation of powers and judicial independence. He's done it trying to meddle in the Russia investigation. He's doing it by suggesting, as I just mentioned minutes ago, that any cabinet secretary could just fire whoever they want if they have undermined the public trust. It was effectively a gong show. And when you get to the end and you strip out the carefully concocted inspirational stories about people in the audience, the applause lines, the vague, meaningless comments about unity and partnership, you are left with a president who spent an hour and a half bragging about things that are either imaginary or terrible, proposing no real policy to speak of, and extending no actual olive branches for bipartisanship, period. It was a joke of a speech, and exactly as I predicted yesterday, his base absolutely loved it. The base is influenced by this garbage. When the base sees Trump praise the parents of Otto Warmbier, who died shortly after getting back from North Korea, completely tragic, that makes them approve of the speech, even though any president can invite them and say hi to them and say this is a tragic thing. It tells us nothing about policy. When Trump says, let's work together and get past our differences, the Trumpist base says, oh, good speech, even though that doesn't actually portray or transmit any meaning or value when the policies are incompetent at best and actively divisive at worst. The best analysis I heard, the best analogy, was Van Jones on CNN. And everybody knows I've had a falling out with Van Jones, which I wish we could fix. It happened a couple years ago. He said that this is basically sweet-tasting candy with poison in it, is what Donald Trump's speech was. It was rhetoric that sort of sounded like what some people want to hear, but the underpinnings of it are actually completely toxic.
Well, last year, he was the guy who said that, you know, this is the night that Trump becomes president.
That's right.
When he gave that first address to Congress.
Yeah.
So I guess he's got to step up the rhetoric in support of the progressive side in this instance.
I
maybe?
actually think we could say, listen, Van Jones said what he genuinely felt last time, and he's saying what he genuinely feels this time, and what he feels mirrors what I feel. What I feel, not what I feels. Not my feels. That's not what I'm saying. Will Trump get an approval bump from this? I don't know. We'll see in a couple days. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. We are on Twitter as a show at David Pakman Show, and I'm curious to see what people in the audience thought.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Richard Firestein. Richard, thank you for being our latest, newest David Pakman Show member. We are also recognizing the sustaining members of the David Pakman Show, and today's sustaining member that I want to recognize is the great Michael Juniman, who has been a member for 7.5 years. His membership date is August 7th of 2010. 2010. Thanks to both Richard and Michael. Thanks to our new members and our sustaining members. And you can sign up for a membership along with all the great membership perks that come with it at davidpakman.com/membership. We have Hatriot Mail for you this week. Quick reminder, if you're not familiar with what Hatriot Mail is, this is everything you need to know about it.
Because the government that is supposedly totally inept is the same government that can pull off a conspiracy that'll blow your mind. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, so we've got our bingo card list of common themes in Hatriot Mail. Misspelling U''re as Y-O-U-R is a common one.
Yeah.
Generally horrible grammar is another one. Homophobic sentiments directed to me or to Pat is
Calling
a
you a
common one. Cuck is a common one. And also on that list is anti-Semitism. And that's the one we're going back to for this week's Hatriot Mail.
Pakman is why people hate the left. David is apparently a lying cunt whose service should be boycotted. How about this validitias? 1. David Pakman is a Jew. 2. David Pakman is dishonest. Ergo, some Jews are dishonest. Hand over the Jew gold, David.
Hey, you know what? This is the first time a Hatriot has ever used the Latin for therefore, ergo, from the traditional teaching of sort of logic. And I don't know what that means. I guess it means even people who know a single Latin word can be horribly anti-Semitic.
And also, this is actually a valid argument, although unfortunately it's not a sound,
argument
because
that's right.
you're not dishonest.
Yes.
So I think he would benefit greatly from the upcoming David Pakman Show Critical Thinking miniseries.
That's exactly right. I think that he would. And by the way, when I say that you can't talk sense into these people, so work on just getting the vote out, this is sort of a perfect example of that. And I will also remind you that you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. You can give a middle finger to the Hatriots by using the membership discount code Hatriot40. If you go to davidpakman.com/membership, you pick any membership you like. And when you get to checkout time, to the checkout phase of the process, you use the coupon code Hatriot40, Hatriot40, and it will save you 40%, which is an absolutely lovely and wonderful thing.
If there was such a thing as this Jew gold that he's talking about, would you share it with him?
Absolutely not. Are you crazy?
Okay.
No. Why would I share Jew gold with Hatriots? That's insane. Okay, I have potentially really good or sad news for you. We are dangerously close to hitting the 2,100 patron goal for releasing our 12 to 15 part critical thinking miniseries. I've been talking about it every day because we are so close to this thing. We fundraise doing membership and on Patreon. Patreon is a platform at patreon.com/David Pakman Show where anyone can make a contribution of as little as $1 a month, and there's no maximum contribution you can make. You go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, you hit the orange button that says become a patron, done deal. We have goals on our Patreon page. And one goal that we have established is that when we reach 2,100 patrons, we will produce for you a multi-part critical thinking mini-series. It will first be released to patrons. It will eventually be released to everybody. So it's not just for patrons. The patrons get the early reward because they trigger, for lack of a better term, the release of the mini-series. But then we make it available to everybody. We have already talked about how we have a completed animated introduction for the Patreon Critical Thinking miniseries. It looks great. We've already sampled one of the 12 to 15 parts that the miniseries will contain. And the goal is 2,100 patrons. Last week, I told you, hey, we're under 100 patrons to go. Earlier this week, late last week rather, we had only 85 patrons left to go. Monday, we had 57 to go. Yesterday, it was 43. And the target now is only 18 patrons away. And we basically have until midnight tonight. Now, you might be saying, well, hold on, David, why did midnight tonight? What if you hit the goal tomorrow or the next day? On the first of the month, Patreon attempts to collect everybody's pledges. And when that happens, sadly, there are people whose credit cards will have expired from January. It's usually 3 to 5% of the patrons. And when that happens on the first of the month, our patron number goes down. It's really depressing when it happens, but it does, and there's nothing we can do about it. Knowing that at midnight tonight, that is going to take place, my desire would be, let's get to the 2,100 today. We're only 18 patrons away. And let's just be done with it and move on with the critical thinking miniseries.
Yeah, I'm on pins and needles here. It's like a Patriots Super Bowl comeback or that night of the Iowa caucuses where Bernie Sanders nearly won. He was like catching up. but we got a deadline coming up.
It's kind of like that, although maybe those aren't the exact analogies I would make, but those are certainly interesting and politically relevant, I would say. So let's do it tonight. 18 patrons to go. Even $1 gets us closer. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's do this thing and move on to the production and release of this miniseries. In the last 24 hours, we have learned about a second Trump-Russia dossier, which, surprise, says a lot of the same things about Trump-Russia collusion that the first dossier said. So to remind you, Trump-Russia dossier number 1 is the dossier that was researched by former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele. It was ultimately provided to the FBI, and it was the dossier about which both then President Obama and then not yet President Donald Trump were briefed. Trump wrote it off as fake news, tried to smear Christopher Steele, but over time, more and more of the allegations from the dossier were confirmed to either be true or partially true. Not everything. I know that there's this cottage industry of people who like to say Pakman's saying that the P tapes are real. Not everything. There's still no hard evidence, for lack of a better term, that Donald Trump urinated on Russian prostitutes, but more and more of the dossier has been corroborated.
And evidence of that could leak?
Yes, there could be a leak of that urinary evidence. A second dossier is now in the hands of the FBI. This one is written by Cody Shearer, who's a political activist and a former journalist that was closely tied to the Clinton White House in the 1990s. And that's the fascinating aspect of this, because Shearer's background is partisan politics, right? Not intelligence gathering, like Christopher Steele's background. The Shearer dossier was mostly ignored, or at least viewed very skeptically by the intelligence community. But The Guardian is now reporting that the FBI is actively looking at this dossier, assessing the claims of the dossier, and pursuing some of the leads in the dossier. And as it happens, there's overlap between dossier number 2 and dossier number 1. It's not new material. The FBI has had the dossier number 2 since October of 2016, but there's now more interest in it. And also, interestingly, again, even though this hasn't been proven, both the Steele dossier and the Shearer dossier contain the claim that Trump was sexually compromised during a 2013 trip to Russia involving lewd acts in a 5-star hotel. The White House, of course, is denying that Trump has ever been compromised in any way. He's the best at not being compromised. So if the P tapes exist, I don't know if we will ever see them. But the broad strokes of this continues to look worse and worse. Yesterday, we reported that the Trump administration is straight up refusing to impose the sanctions voted on by Congress. Meanwhile, yet another Trump-Russia memo is out there making a lot of the same claims as the first dossier. And you know what? Every time I hear about this, Pat, I'm reminded that there's really nothing concerning about Trump-Russia at all, other than the Michael Flynn thing and the Paul Manafort incident and the Rex Tillerson Russia connections and Jeff Sessions' multiple lies about Russian meetings and Jared Kushner's connection to Russian oligarchs and Carter Page's trips to Russia and the Trump Tower quid pro quo meeting with Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya and the Rosneft thing and the Gazprom thing, the Oval Office meeting where Trump spilled secrets from our allies to a Russian spy recruiter named Sergei Kislyak, and Trump possibly laundering money through inflated condo sales to Russians, and Trump owing $350 million to Deutsche Bank, which is also connected to Russian business dealings, and like dozens of other things. There's nothing at all that should concern any of us that something's going on with Russia.
None of that convinces you, so maybe the Shearer dossier would convince you.
Sure.
Now, obviously, you can't take it at face value because the guy is a partisan.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that the claims that he's making and the assertions that he's making aren't valid, and that's what the FBI is going to look into.
And the reason why this is of renewed interest to the FBI is that it's now clear that the overlap between the Steele dossier and the Shearer dossier is significant, to say the least. So Trump-Russia dossier number 2 just keeps getting more interesting. Discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, so normally we would go to an interview now, but we actually had a last-minute interview cancellation that was completely beyond our control. So I thought, why don't we go to the phones and see what's on people's minds? Not something we usually do on the Wednesday show, but let's do it. 617-830-4750 is the number. Listen for your area code because you won't hear like a beep when I put you on. So listen for your area code. First callers from the 404 area code. 404 caller, tell us who this is and what's on your mind.
Hi, David. This is Jeff from Atlanta. How you doing?
Good. Go ahead, Jeff.
Good, good. I was just calling to ask you a couple questions about your progressive policies, if you were in favor of Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, Indian awards, that sort of thing. I've seen a lot of your videos, and I'm just trying to nail down where you stand on those issues.
Yeah, I've been pretty clear about all those issues. I'm for a system of healthcare where everybody gets at least a basic level of care regardless of ability to pay. I think health insurance should be taken out of the so-called free market or profit market. I have not been definitive about whether 15 is the exact right minimum wage, but I do think it needs to be closer to a living wage. What other questions did you have?
If you support the ending all the interventionist wars in Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, just because we're creating more terrorists that way as well.
Yep. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not an isolationist, but I don't believe that the United States should be or necessarily even has the right to be the world's police officer.
Well, absolutely, because I mean, if you look at before the Obama administration, we were in 2 conflicts, and after the Obama administration, we're involved in 7, and now Trump has ramped that up to almost 10 with the
that can also be deceptive. Also, I mean, it's important to talk about the degrees to which we're involved in those conflicts, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just feel that there isn't any public voices on the mainstream media and talk about these issues, and that's why I constantly keep bringing them up with others. And because everyone's still focused on irrelevant issues like who won the election and why they won the election, instead of moving forward and say, hey, Democrats, you need to focus on progressive policies and not just being anti-Trump.
I agree with you, particularly because you don't know what will ultimately come of the Trump-Russia investigation. You've got to have something to run on. You've got to be able to make a case in 2018. Jeff, I appreciate the call. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, every now and then you got to tout your progressive credentials, and I'm glad that Jeff gave you the opportunity to do so.
Yes, it really teed a few up for me there. I like that. 617-830-4750. We are going to go to our next caller from the 507 area code. Who's this from 507?
Hi, David. I am Groot.
Your name is Groot, you said?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. What's on your mind, Groot?
I was wondering what you make of the news that Trey Gowdy will not be seeking re-election, and what that means for the Nunez memo, and if what's going to be happening next with the whole story.
Well, I think that the reports right now, and more might be known about this by the time the show goes out today, the reports are that the Nunez memo is going to be released at some point relatively soon, that it's going to be released and we're going to see what's in it. As far as Trey Gowdy not seeking re-election, he has become like a cult hero in the Republican Party because of his very prosecutorial type series of questions during hearings. But quite frankly, I don't know that we've ever really learned anything from those question and answer sessions, and I think it's basically showboating. I don't care.
Right.
I mean, go ahead and quit Trey Gowdy. It doesn't really make a difference to me.
It sounds to me like the exact same thing as to what happened to Jason Chaffetz, right? He was the investigator-in-chief against Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Yep.
But now that you're in a position where you have to investigate the Republican president, you don't want to do it anymore. So Chaffetz is resigning, and Trey Gowdy now too.
Gowdy as well. Yeah. No, but I listen. I look for the memo thing. It's become this sort of litmus test where on the internet, if you're not constantly just talking about releasing the memo, you're in some way part of some kind of officialist or corporate media cover up of the truth or whatever. Listen, figure out whether the memo can or can't be released. Let's figure out what's in the memo. Let's make sure we're careful about classified information, which supposedly was one of the big reasons not to vote for Hillary Clinton, that she was careless with classified information. Now everybody wants this memo released regardless of what's in there. And then let's evaluate what's in the memo. And I still am having a hard time understanding how it relates to the credibility of Mueller's investigation, Groot?
Right. I just wondered if you saw that Gowdy dropping out and trying to slink away basically from the whole thing would discredit the entire memo. And
I don't think it'll discredit it. We just got to see the memo and see what's in there. All right, Groot, appreciate the call. Thank you very much. We'll keep taking calls at 617-830-4750, going next to the 910 area code. Caller from 910. Who's this?
My name is Todd French. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great. Now, hey, Todd, we're not on speakerphone, are we?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can we get off speakerphone? No speakerphone ever. The speakerphone is ruining the call-in show. And as soon as we're off speakerphone, I'd love to take a question
Absolutely.
from you.
Hello, can you hear me now, sir?
Oh, that's so much better, Todd. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Here's the thing, man, and this is more of a statement than anything.
Okay.
Why not release the memo, right? and the reason why I say this is because the Republicans are known for doing stupid stuff anyway. It's a memo written by Republicans.
Right.
It would be different if it was a memo written by Norwegians, okay? That's an independent, nonpartisan memo. Release the memo because it's going to be stupid anyway.
Yeah,
and
I agree with you. Listen,
yes.
here's the thing, Todd. If you are concerned with classified information getting out there that shouldn't, which Donald Trump claims he's concerned with, Republicans claim they were concerned with when it came to Hillary Clinton's handling of classified information, then make sure that you redact what needs to be redacted and release the thing. I agree, but where I am having a problem with the release the memo stuff, Todd, is that it's becoming a refrain for people who just want to take attention away from the serious Robert Mueller Russia investigation, as if the two things are necessarily related, and they're not.
But see, I say this, right? Didn't we just put Chelsea Manning in jail for 6 years for this? Release the memo, then put Devin Nunes in jail.
Oh, sure, yeah, let's toss him in jail, no doubt. No, but
I mean,
I
wouldn't that
think we're
make
going to
sense?
see the memo, though, Todd. Like I said to the last caller, I think we're going to see the memo relatively soon.
Right. But I'm just saying, it's going to be stupid. We all know it's stupid. It's a memo written by Republicans that support a Republican president. Release it. It's going to be stupid. The reason why Jeff Sessions recused himself, probably because when all this stuff go down, he don't want to be involved. That's probably why he did it.
That would suggest that Jeff Sessions acted with significant foresight, and I've seen no evidence that that's something Jeff Sessions really does. Todd, thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you guys. Hey, I love your work. You guys keep it up.
All right, thank you so much. 617-830-4750 is the number. Let's go to our next caller from the 570 area code. Caller from 570. Go ahead.
Hey, David. Big fan of the show. There's been a lot of spoofing on the bid and ask for Bitcoin lately, and I've been thinking about getting involved with it. But do you think that the bidding and the spoofing can be fixed really without regulation?
Oh, tell me more about what you mean. I missed a word there. You said there's been spoofing. Did you say where with Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's on the bid and ask for Bitcoin.
Oh.
That'll happen a lot with the price manipulation.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, here we're getting very technical here, but there is something you can do. If you don't make market orders for buying and selling, and I know that this immediately a bunch of people in the audience's eyes are glazing over. If you make sure that you are putting in limit orders where you are saying what's the price you're willing to pay or accept for buying or selling Bitcoin, you do solve like 90% of the bid-ask spoofing stuff. Market orders are overwhelmingly what's responsible for that. And I don't necessarily know enough about it to say we need or don't need regulation, but wouldn't just avoiding market orders solve a lot of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, but you have people submitting like bids and asks for like $1 million, just a little bit below or a little bit above like the price of the actual bid, you know?
Yes. All right. Well, listen, like I said, I don't know about the regulation as a solution. But avoid the market orders, and I think that will solve a lot of the problem. Thanks for the call. Very much appreciated. We are taking calls at 617-830-4750. We're going to the 732 area code next. Who's this calling from 732?
Hey, David, it's Kyle. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kyle. Go ahead.
Hey, so just kind of a more philosophical question about progressivism in general. Are there any, major progressive political points that you don't agree with or have any issues with?
That I don't agree with or that I do have issues with, you mean, right?
Yes.
Listen, it's all about matters of degree.
That you think should be...
It's all about matters of degree, Kyle. So I'm increasingly against so-called litmus tests on principles. I think that, listen, I just read about a guy who's running as a Democrat who is against abortion and for something else that just really has no place sort of on the left. So this stuff matters, and specific policy positions matter and principles matter, but I think we need to take a sort of more holistic approach. There's no set of principles that will always be applied in the same way that makes it so that we can say, hey, here's an issue on which I just disagree with progressives. I mean, I've been very clear that I am against the sort of safe space language policing that has become popular in some areas of the left. I've talked about how I think that the way identity politics has been carried out by the left over the last 5 to 8 or maybe even 10 years has probably done more of a disservice than a service to the left. So there's disagreements on implementation, but if you're asking me, is there like a broad strokes principle of the progressive platform that I just flat out disagree with, it's not so black and white, you know?
No, I understand. I mean, I find myself having issues with the progressive ideology on education in terms of both higher ed and lower levels of education. I'm personally more for, implementing charter schools in urban areas if possible, and I'm not really sure about, free college for everyone. So I feel like that's one place where, even though most of my other politics are progressive, that's a whole area where I'd probably disagree with the majority of progressives on. So I wasn't sure if you
all big
issues,
big issues that we're not going to be able to get into today, but thanks for calling in and letting me know. I think it's interesting. It's important to sort of think about. There's really no one movement that I think is likely to encompass everybody's exact views, and that's sort of okay. That's sort of how the world works. Thanks to everybody who called in. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If there was any doubt remaining about the relationship of WikiLeaks' Julian Assange to the American right and Russia and the Trump administration, Julian Assange has now been caught offering dirt on a Democratic senator to someone pretending to be right-wing Fox News host Sean Hannity online. I think you're going to like this story. A woman named Del Gilliam started pretending to be Sean Hannity online after Sean Hannity's actual Twitter account temporarily went offline. And Del got a direct message back on Twitter from Julian Assange himself. She created an account, Sean Hannity, and then I think it's like two underscores, and ended up talking directly to Assange on Twitter. And it got to the point of Assange, quote, setting up a meeting over other channels for Assange to send Hannity, who was actually this woman, Del Gilliam, news about Senator Mark Warner, meaning Democratic Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee that is currently investigating Trump-Russia collusion. And they actually went as far as setting up a call for 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, about 6 hours after the conversation took place. We have the screenshots, the direct messages from Twitter, and you see fake Hannity saying, I can't believe this is happening. I mean, I can. It's crazy. Nothing can be put past people. I'm exhausted from the whole night. What about you, though? You doing okay? And Assange says, I'm happy as long as there is a fight, to which fake Sean Hannity replies, I'm definitely up for a fight. You up for a call at 9:30 Eastern? To which Julian Assange says, yes. You can send me messages on other channels. Have some news about Warner. Fake Hannity says, sounds good, talk to you soon. And Julian Assange says, take care. What does this tell us? Well, it keeps building the picture of WikiLeaks not as an unbiased clearinghouse of information that they carefully and responsibly redact and publish without regard to political implications. This is an actor that is working either deliberately or as useful idiots. And useful idiots is not an ad hominem. It's a very specific term with a precise meaning for the furtherance of Russian propaganda and or the benefit of the Trump administration. Before, the idea was, oh, Assange says our contact for the Democratic leaks wasn't part of the Russian state. And we ultimately found out the letter of that was true, but there were go-betweens there. And information that was released by WikiLeaks did at some point come from Russian individuals or those working on behalf of Russian actors. Later, Julian Assange claimed, well, you know, our sources are anonymous. We have an anonymizing system for submitting documents and data, so we don't actually know who submits data to us. Well, then how could he have been so sure that the people submitting data and documents to WikiLeaks weren't working on the behalf of the Russian government? It really didn't make any sense. We later learned that during the Trump campaign, Julian Assange was communicating directly with Donald Trump Jr. and talking about possible dirt that they'd be able to provide. And the timing of those messages with Trump Jr. was also suspicious when compared to public timelines about statements from Trump and his campaign. And now the cherry on top, we find out that Julian Assange was eager to pass along supposed dirt about a Democratic senator, a senator who is involved in the investigation of Trump-Russia collusion, to someone he believed to be Sean Hannity, a hyper-partisan, ideological conservative Fox News host.
It's a little odd to me, though, because you'd think that Julian Assange would be a little bit more tech-savvy, as he obviously is. I mean, you can check to see whether or not the Twitter account has, like, a verification check mark.
Sure.
And maybe he was trying to, like, plan this double switch to turn the tables around and trick the other person, maybe? I don't know.
It occurred to me, but if that's true, wouldn't we have heard about it by now?
Possibly, yeah.
I don't know. It's not like this just broke an hour ago.
If the hoax made it to 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, it would have been great to see, like, how she would carry it out. Like, would she use a Sean Hannity soundboard, perhaps?
I have no idea. And I think she didn't even know the answer to that because she never expected it to get this far. It was sort of created as a parody account, and it's since been deactivated by Twitter. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. So listen, bottom line, when you look at the behavior of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, this is not how an unbiased publisher of relevant political documents behaves, period. This is how partisan activists behave, and that's okay. I don't have a problem with people being partisan activists as long as we understand and agree that that's what they are, period. States' rights are a beautiful thing, according to the constitutional right. I love this picture of Ajit Pai with a huge Reese's coffee mug. States' rights might be the path to reinstating net neutrality by law. The California State Senate has approved a bill that would impose net neutrality restrictions on internet service providers that want to operate in the state of California. And of course, the FCC, under the leadership of Trump appointee Ajit Pai, recently destroyed the Obama-era net neutrality regulations. We covered it extensively the whole way. This is not a simple victory in California, though, because when the FCC repealed net neutrality regulations, they anticipated that states might try to impose their own. And the FCC actually included a provision which says state and local governments can't enforce rules at the local level. But many states are actually moving forward and trying to do it anyway. The FCC is being sued by 21 states and Washington, D.C., to try to at least reverse the preemption of local net neutrality laws. And in California, SB 460 has passed the Senate. This is a bill which says that if you're an internet service provider and you want to do business in California, you can't participate in the blocking of any lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices. You're not allowed to do any throttling, meaning the slowing down of access to certain websites or applications. You wouldn't be allowed to establish paid prioritization or preferential treatment to some internet traffic, And you'd also be banned from engaging in deceptive or misleading marketing practices to distort the truth about your treatment of internet traffic. In other words, you would have to tell the truth if this California bill ultimately becomes the law about what you're doing with internet traffic. Now, the question is, will this stand? And the answer is we don't know. Because on the one hand, as passed by the FCC, these types of state and local laws mandating net neutrality aren't actually allowed. The other hand is that, number one, there are numerous lawsuits against the FCC challenging those provisions. And number two, there's a possible legal argument that rather than a bill like this being net neutrality, which would not be allowed by the FCC provision saying no state level net neutrality, if California can argue these are business regulations under the guise of consumer protection, arguably they'd be able to stand without violating the federal net neutrality repeal. It's getting into legal questions that are just going to have to be sorted out.
It seems to me like a classic case of 10th Amendment versus supremacy clause in the Constitution.
Explain.
Well, the 10th Amendment provides states' rights, anything not granted by the federal government under the Bill of Rights. And then the supremacy clause means that pretty much the federal government trumps the state government, and they have the final say.
Yeah, this is a classic battle between states' rightists and those who are not anti-states' rights, but believe that the federal government does govern all the states, I guess. And it's going to be a legal battle. The good news is that California and other states are at least fighting back on something that's really, really important. I mean, this is a paramount issue. Like campaign finance, net neutrality is an issue that impacts almost any political issue that you care about.
Yeah, and a similar move was made in Montana, too. But
That's right.
Whereas Montana has like 1 million people, California is the most populous state. It has 40 million people. So I got to say this is more significant.
That's why the California thing could be so important, because California can be a sort of bellwether for what could be possible in other states. There are other paths forward to try to reinstate net neutrality type regulations at the state level, and Wyoming is an example. Wyoming did something interesting where they passed an executive order which narrowed who's allowed to deliver services to the state government. So they're not regulating in a way that conflicts with what the FCC did. They're simply saying by executive order, if you want to do business with the state and you're an internet service provider, you have to do it with network neutrality in place. You can choose not to do business with the state. That's your choice. And that legally might be a stronger path forward. But the big picture is different states are trying different paths to put net neutrality back in. And I think that that is a really, really, really important thing, and we're going to continue following it. We have 3 voicemails for you today. And a lot of times there's questions from the audience about, David, how many voicemails do you get and what are most of them like? I want to give you one example of, I've talked about these repeat callers who will sometimes leave 10, 15, or even 20 messages back to back to back. I'm going to play just a little bit. These are long voicemails, but I'm going to play just a few seconds of 3 of them. I can't tell what's even happening here. It sounds like someone is maybe on speakerphone, or the State of the Union address is playing in the background.
I have an idea. I'll tell you
later.
later.
Or a show analyzing the State of the Union is playing in the background. Let's listen to the first. This is calls that we get. Okay, here's the first one.
Everyone's still recovering in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, everywhere. We are with you. We love you. And we always will pull through together.
Okay. So that clearly is a bit.
That is going to be a comforting message to the people of Puerto Rico once they have electricity.
Yeah. Okay, let's stop that one. So that seems to be a clip of Trump from the State of the Union,
right,
followed by a bit of a news broadcast about it.
Or like a late night comedy talk show.
Or something like that.
Coverage, yeah.
Okay, so the same person immediately called us back after this voicemail ended.
Great American flag. Really? Because down in Charlottesville, I saw your supporters carrying 2 other flags.
Okay, let's pause this one. That sounds like Jimmy Kimmel a little bit to me. Is that possible?
Oh, well, don't they record those like at 5 p.m., well before when the State of the Union would be? Because the State of the Union was at 9.
Yeah.
And those late night talk shows like Kimmel and Fallon and Colbert,
they
record
do usually
earlier.
record early, although maybe they didn't yesterday to do coverage.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. So maybe that's what. So somebody just called in, and I guess they're watching other shows. And then here's a third voicemail from the same person.
Just who doesn't want America? Under the current broken system, a single immigrant can bring in virtually unlimited numbers of distant relatives. Under our plan, we focus on the immediate family.
So, again, it's people call in with clips of the State of the Union. Why do people do this?
Yeah.
We actually, we have limited resources at the David Pakman Show. And when I get in and we have 75 voicemails from the previous day, and 50 of them are from 3 or 4 people with stuff like this, it just slows down our production day. Don't do this to us.
We do have limited resources. However, we do have access to the State of the Union speech
Yes, we also do.
comedians' coverage.
So we
I
don't need
see what
you.
the point of this
We
is.
don't need you to have the State of the Union address recorded on our voicemail. Anyway, just a little window, a little peek behind the curtain as to what we're dealing with here on a daily basis. Great bonus show today. We will talk about Bill Nye, the science guy, attending the State of the Union address, and there are some scientists that are not happy with him. An Iranian woman takes off her headscarf to protest the veil law, and the healthiest non-milk milk is soy milk, which is, of course, not actually milk. We will talk about that new study, and we will disparage almond milk. I've been looking for an opportunity to disparage almond milk on the program for so long. No, I'm kidding around. But we will talk about that and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership or on Patreon at patreon.com/davidpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.